think the spiritual dimension provides leadership to your life. It's highly relative to habit too. The spiritual dimension is your core, your center, your commitment to your value system. It's a very private area of life and a supremely important one. It draws upon the source that inspires and uplifts you and tie you to the timeless truth of all humanity, and people do it very, very differently. I find renewal in daily prayer, mediation on the scriptures because they represent my value system. As I read and meditate, I feel renewed, strengthened, centered, and recommitted to serve. Immersion in great literature or great music can provide a similar renewal of the spirit for some. There are others who find it in the way they communicate with nature. Nature bequeaths its own blessing on those who immerse themselves in it. When you are able to leave the noise and the discord of the city and give yourself up the harmony and the rhythm of nature, you came back renewed for our time. You are undisturable, almost unflappable, until gradually the noise and the discord from outside start to invade that sense of inner peace. Arthur Gordon shares a wonderful, intimate story of his own spiritual renewal in a little story called The Turn of the Tide. It tells of a time in his life when he begins to feel that everything was stale and flat. His enthusiasms waned, his writing efforts were fruitless, and the situation was growing worse day by day. Finally, he determined to get help from a medical doctor, observing nothing physical wrong. The doctor asked him if he would be able to follow his instructions for one day. When Gordon replied that he could, the doctor told him to spend the following day in the place where he was happiest as a child. He could take food, but he was not to take to anyone or to read or write to or listen to the radio. He then wrote out four prescriptions and told him to open one at 9, 12, 3, or 6 o'clock. You are serious? Gordon asked him. You won't think I'm joking when you get my bill, was the reply. So the next morning, Gordon went to the beach. As he opened the first prescription, he read, listened carefully. He thought the doctor was insane. How could he listen for 3 hours? But he had agreed to follow the doctor's orders, so he listened. He heard the usual sound of the sea and the birds. After a while, he could hear the other sounds that weren't so apparent at first. As he listened, he began to think of listen the sea had taught him as a child. Patience, respect, and awareness of the interdependence of things. He began to listen to the sound and the silence and to feel a growing peace. At noon, he opened the second slip of paper and tried reaching back to what? He wondered, perhaps to childhood, perhaps to memories of happy times. He thought about his past, about the many little moments of joy. He tried to remember them with exactness, and in remembering, he found a growing warmth inside. At 3 o'clock, he opened the third piece of paper. Until now, the prescriptions had been easy to take, but this one was different. It had examined your motives. At first, he was defensive. He thought about what he wanted: success, recognition, security, and justified. He justified them all. But then He then the thought occurred to him that those motives weren't good enough and that perhaps therein was the answer to his stagnant situation. He considered his motive deeply. He thought about past happiness and at last the answer came to him. In a flash of certainty, he wrote, I saw that if one's motives are wrong, nothing can be right. It makes no difference whether you are a mailman, a hairdresser, an insurance salesman, a housewife, whatever, as long as you feel you are serving others, you do the job well. When you are concerned only with helping yourself, you do it less well. A law as inexorable or as gravity. When 6 o'clock came, the final prescriptions didn't take long to fill. Write your worries on the sand, it said. He knelt and wrote several words with a piece of broken shell. Then he turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He knew the tide would come in. Spiritual renewal takes an investment of time, but it's quadrant 2 activity we don't really have time to neglect. The great reformer Martin Luther is quoted as saying, I have so much to do today, I'll need to spend another hour on my knees to him. Prayer was not a mechanical duty, but rather a source of power in releasing and multiplying his energies. Someone once inquired for a far eastern Zen master who had a great serenity and peace about him no matter what pressures he faced. How do you maintain that serenity and peace? He replied, I never leave my place of meditation. He meditated early in the morning, and for the rest of the day he cried the peace of those movement with him in his mind and heart. The idea is that when we take time to draw on the leadership center of our life, what life is ultimately all about, it spreads like an umbrella over everything else. It renews us, it refreshes us, particularly if we recommit to it. This is why I believe a personal mission statement is so important. If we have a deep understanding of our centered and our purpose, we can review and recommit to it frequently. In our daily spiritual renewal, we can visualize and live out the event of the day in harmony with those values. Religious leaders David O. Mackey taught the greatest battles of life are fought out daily in the silent chambers of soul. If you win the battles there, y- if you settle the issues that inwardly conflict, you feel a sense of peace, a sense of knowing what you are about, and you will find that the public victories where you tend to think cooperatively to promote the welfare and good to other people and to be genuinely happy for others people's success will follow naturally. The mental dimensions, most of our mental development and study disciplines comes through formal education, but as soon as we leave the external discipline of schools, many of us let our minds entropy. We don't do anything more serious reading, we don't explore new subjects in any real depth outside our action field, we don't think analytically, we don't write, at least not critically or in a way that tests our ability to express ourselves in distilled, clear, concise language. Instead, we spend our time watching TV. Continuing survey indicate that television is on in most homes some 35 to 45 hours a week. That's as much time as many people put into their jobs, more than most put into school. It's the most powerful socializing influence there is. And when we watch, we are subject to all the values that are being taught through it. that can powerfully influence us in very subtle and imperceptible ways. Wisdom is watching television records the effective self management of habitry, which enables you to discriminate and to select the informing, inspiring, and entertaining programs which best serve and express your purpose and values. It's your family. We limit television watching to around 7 hours a week, an average of about an hour a day. We had a family council at which we talk about it and look at some of the data regarding what's happening in homes because of television. We found that by discussing it as a family, when no one was defensive or argumentative, people started to realize the dependent sickness of becoming addicted to soap operas or to a steady diet of a particular program. I'm grateful for television and for the many high quality educational and entertainment programs. They can enrich our life and contribute meaningfully to our purpose and goals, but there are many programs that simply waste our time and minds, and many that influence us in negative ways if we let them. Like the body, television is a good servant but a poor master. We need to practice habit 3 and manage ourselves effectively to maximize the use of any resources in accomplishing our missions. Education. Continuing education, continually honing and expanding the mind is vital mental renewal. Sometimes that involves the external disciplines of the classroom or system systematize study programs. More often it does not. Proactive people can figure out many ways to educate themselves. It is extremely valuable to train the mind to stand apart and examine its own program. That to me is the definition of a liberal education, and the ability to examine the programs of life against larger questions and purposes and others paradigms. Trainings without such education narrows and closes the mind so that the assumptions underlying the trainings are never examined. That's why it is so valuable to read broadly and to expose yourself to get to great minds. There's no better way to inform and expand your mind on a regular basis than to get into the habit of reading good literature. That's another high leverage quadrant 2 activity. You can get into the best minds that are now or that have ever been in the world. I highly recommend starting with a goal of a book a month, then a book every 2 weeks, then a book a week. The person who doesn't read is no better off than the person who can't read. Quality literature such as the great books, the Howard Classic, autobiographies, National Geographic, and other publications that expand our culture awareness and current literature in various fields can expand our paradigms and sharpen our mental saw, particularly if we practice habit 5 as we read and seek first to understand. We if we use our own autobiography to make early judgment before we really understand what an author was has to say, we limit the benefits of the reading experience. Writing is another powerful way to sharpen the mental saw. Keeping a journal of our thoughts, experiences, insight, and learning promotes mental clarity, exactness, and context. Writing good letters, communicating on the deeper level of thoughts, feelings, and ideas rather than on the shallow, superficial level of events. Also, events are ability to think clearly, to reason accurately, and to be understood effectively. Organizing and planning represent other forms of mental renewal associated with habit 2 and 3. It's beginning with the and in mind, and being able mentally to organize to accomplish that ends. It's exercising the visualizing, imagining power of your mind to see the end from the beginning and to see the entire journey, at least in principles, if not in steps. It is said that wars are won in the general tense, sharpening the saw in the first three dimensions: the physical, the spiritual, the mental, is a practice I call the daily private victory, and commend to you the simple practice to expanding 1 hour a day every day doing it. 1 hour a day for the rest of your life. There is no other way you could expend an hour that would begin to compare with the daily private victory in terms of value and results. It will affect every decision, every relationship. It will greatly improve the quality, the effectiveness of every other hour of the day, including the depth and restfulness of your sleep. It will build the long term physical, spiritual, and mental strength to enable you to handle difficult challenges in life. In the words of Phillips Brooks, someday in the year to come, you will be wrestling with the great temptation or trembling under the great sorrow of your life. But the real struggle is here now. Now it is being decided whether in the day of your supreme sorrow or temptation you shall miserably fail or gloriously conquer. Characters cannot be made except by a steady, long, continued process. The social emotional dimensions. While the physical, spiritual, and mental dimensions are closely related to habit 1, 2, and 3, centered on the principles of a personal vision, leadership, and management, the social emotional dimension focuses on habit 4, 5, and 6, centered on the principles of interpersonal leadership, empathic communication, and creative cooperative. The social and emotional dimensions of our life are tied together because our emotional life is primarily but not exclusively developed out of and manifested in our relational with others. Renewing our social emotional dimension does not take time in the same sense that renewing the other dimension does. We can do it in our normal everyday interaction with other people, but it definitely requires exercise. We may have to push ourselves because many of us have not achieved the level of private victory and the skills of the public victory necessarily for habit 4, 5, and 6 to come naturally to us in all our interaction. Suppose that you are a key person in my life. You might be my boss, my subordinate, my coworker, my friend, my neighbor, my spouse, my child, a member of my extended family, anyone with whom I want or need to interact. Suppose we need to communicate together, to work together, to discuss a jugular issue, to accomplish a purpose or solve a problem, but we see things differently. We are looking through different glasses. We see the young lady, you see the young lady, I see the old woman. So I practice habit 4. I come to you and I can see that we are approaching this situation differently. We agree to communicate until we can find a solution we both feel good about. Would you be willing to do that? Most people would be willing to say yes to that. Then I move to habit 5. Let me listen to you first. Instead of listening with intent to reply, I listen empathically in order to deeply, truly understand your paradigm. When I can explain your point of view as well as you can find, then I focus on communicating my points of view to you so that you can understand it as well. based on the commitment to search for a solution that we both feel good about and a deep understanding of each other's point of view. And we move to habit 6. We work together to produce third alternative solution to our difference that we both recognize are better than the ones either you or I proposed initially. Success in habit 4, 5, and 6 is not primarily a matter of intellect. It's primarily a matter of emotions. It's highly related to our sense of personal security. If our personal security comes from source within ourselves, then we have the strength to practice the habit of public victory. If we are emotionally insecure, even though we may be intellectually very advanced, practicing habit 4, 5, and 6 with people who think differently on jugular issues of life can be trebly threatening.